Welcome to Alpha Australia's event, Out for Your Career, where we dive into the experiences and challenges of coming out in your workplace. My name is Joe, and I'll be your facilitator for this evening. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land on which we gather, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us tonight. I believe inclusion in the workplace has come a long way in the past few decades. The 2017 Midsummer Festival survey has indicated that 52% of the LGBTIQA+ population are proudly out to all in their professional environment. However, 56% of the queer population have experienced homophobia in their workplace in the past 12 months. Furthermore, 47% of those who are in the closet at work are still worried about the potential negative impact their sexuality may have on their career. This can make the decision to be your authentic self at work a difficult one. In response to National Coming Out Day on the 11th of October, we would like to use this opportunity to discuss some of the challenges and difficulties queer professionals may encounter, as well as share our experiences and insight in order to assist people to feel more comfortable to be out at work. I believe this aligns with our purpose here at Alpha Australia, to champion authenticity in the workplace, empowering Australia's LGBTIQA+ student and young professionals to thrive. We are pleased to have the CEO of Alpha Australia here with us tonight. I'll now hand over to Blake Connell, who will tell us a little bit more about the National Coming Out Day in our organisation.
Thanks, Joe. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians. So I'm dialing in tonight from the place we now call Sydney. So I would like to pay my respects to the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and also pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As Joe alluded to, my name is Blake Connell, he, him pronouns. And I'm the CEO, the proud CEO of Out for Australia, who's bringing you this event tonight. And as Joe alluded to, National Coming Out Day and tonight's event, this topic is really close to my heart personally, and really goes to the core of what our organisation as Out for Australia does. One of the core reasons that our organisation was founded to begin with was we noticed that there was this moment as young people and professionals were finishing school, where they're about to step into the workplace, where they had all these uncertainties as anxieties to do with their identity, which revolved around, am I allowed to be out in the workplace? And in a worst case scenario, this translated to them actually staying or going back into the closet when they got into that workplace for the first time. Now, not being able to be out in any situation, in any context is a huge problem. But in the workplace, not being able to be out is a really specific problem, which statistics and which studies show comes with a whole set of really specific problems. So to give you some examples from the DCA, from the Diversity Council of Australia, we know that when you're not able to be out at work, when you're not able to be your authentic self at work, you're twice as likely as someone else just not to be able to be happy, to be down, to be sad. On top of that, you're 45% less likely to be satisfied with your job. And on top of all that, there's stuff that even goes to, how well we can do our job. So you're less likely to be, for example, innovative. You're less likely to be good at, or perceived as good at, customer service, or be able to work well in a team. So there's all these terrible things that really specifically affect queer people when they're not able to be their whole selves at work. Now, we were founded in 2013. It's now 2020, and there has been some really amazing progress on these fronts, but we're certainly not done. As Joe alluded to before, I think you took your stat, Joe, from the Midsummer survey, I think, who suggested 52%. Well, the Diversity Council of Australia suggests it could be even worse, that only 32% of LGBTQIA+ people may be out to everyone at work. And when you look at specific subgroups within that community, it gets even worse. So for example, if you've got more than one LGBTQIA, let's call it attribute. So for example, if you're gay and trans, suddenly this statistic is not 32, it's 14%. And if you're bi, for example, this statistic is 16%. Only 16% of bi people are out to everyone at work. So it's still, it's 2020, it's modern Australia, but being able to be out at work and be yourself is still a huge hurdle that exists. and which our organisation is really proudly fighting to overcome. And so I suppose to bring it all back to us, to Out for Australia, who are we, what do we do? We're an organisation of 50 plus volunteers from around Australia. You've got some of us on this call tonight. And we do many things, but I'd like to bring your attention to two of our core services, which attach quite neatly to National Coming Out Day and what we're talking about tonight. The first is our mentoring program. I'm hoping I get an opportunity to speak more about it tonight. But to give you the 2-second plug, it's Australia's largest independent LGBTQIA+ mentoring program, and it's completely free and it's completely digital to sign up. And basically it gives opportunities, the young people, the professionals I was speaking about just before, who aren't certain about what it's like to be out in the workplace, whether that workplace is a law firm or a construction site or a science lab, whatever it may be. They get to connect with people who are in those industries or maybe in parallel industries and who've done it before and maybe have the same identity as them to ask questions. That's our first thing. That's what we love. That's mentoring, and we believe passionately in the power of mentoring. The second thing, big thing we do, and which we're doing right now, is our events program, which since COVID hit has gone completely online. We run, again, a range of topics, anything from writing a good CV to what is it to be trans in the workplace. And we discuss those topics in formats like tonight. Again, all with a view to answering those questions that young LGBTQIA+ people don't know the answers to, that they're scratching their heads about. I might leave it at that, Joe, and throw back to you, because otherwise I could go on forever and I want us to jump into this event. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be definite plugs for Out for Australia and what we do through the course of tonight.
Thank you, Blake. I'm proud to have a very impressive panel here with us this evening. We have Dr. Tanner, we have Ezra, Ruby, and Blake, who will share their own unique coming out journeys with the group. I'll now let them to give us some introductions of themselves. Shall we start with Dr. Tanner?
Good evening, and thank you very much for Out for Australia for having me on this panel. So I'm Tanner Tan. I am a mechanical and biomedical engineer working in the area of transport and road safety. So I head up the research and evaluation team at a company based in Melbourne called Safe System Solutions, and I happen to be gay.
I believe I might be next. Thank you so much, Tanner. It's a real pleasure to have you on the panel this evening. We've worked together in the past, and it's really good to see you here this evening. So my name is Ezra. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I am the State Director for Out for Australia here in Victoria. I'm currently living in Naarm, otherwise known as Melbourne, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, emerging, acknowledging the lands on which I am streaming from this evening, the people of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people who may be tuning in this evening. So I hold a few different carrots or sticks, depending on how you want to sort of analogize it. I'm trans, I'm non-binary, I'm queer, was gay, back in a former life, identify strongly sort of in the ACE spectrum as well, and I'm also identify in terms of neurodiversity. I have ADHD and lived experience with a disability. So there's a few different strands that kind of come together for me. And I'm really looking forward to sharing my story tonight in terms of how those all intersect.
Hi, my name is Ruby. I'm a lawyer down in Melbourne, and I'm also an OFA volunteer. I'm the admin officer. My family's Sri Lankan, my family's Sri Lankan Tamil, and one of the things I'm super passionate about is the struggles of people who are QTPOC, so queer, trans, intersex, and people of color, and the difficulties of coming out and being out in some spaces, but not in other spaces. And that's something that I'm looking forward to talking about tonight.
Should I jump in here, Joe? I think everyone already met me already, but yeah, Blake, I'll just add, I think I said before, he, him pronouns, but identify as a gay man.
Thanks, Blake. Before we get into our first question, I'd just like the audience to know that throughout our event tonight, please feel free to drop in any questions through our Facebook live chat or our Zoom comment section. One of our volunteers will be noting them down, and we will be tackling these topics later on in the panel. So our first question for tonight is, we all know that coming out in the workplace for the first time can be very intimidating. In your experience, were there any situations or environments at work where you've decided not to come out? Perhaps situations where you were unsure how this decision may impact your career?
I might jump on if, oh, no, Blake, did you want to go first?
No, Ezra, you go.
No worries. This is a really interesting question for me. I've worked in a few different industries in my life. I worked in hospitality where I don't think being in the closet was a possibility because I sort of relied on my really overt flamboyance at the age of 18 to get me sales and get me tips. So that was quite sort of straightforward. But then there was stepping in and out of closets in that space, perhaps with customers, depending on their comfort level and how they would respond to me. Not just because I wanted to stay safe in the workplace, but also because I wanted to make a sale. I've since transitioned into, pun intended, working in the public sector, and that's been a really mixed bag. I'm currently in a role in an area of government which is very open and accepting and inclusive, and that's actually impacted me really positively. But there was definitely a time where I was working in a space in my first public service job in Australia, where the division I was working in within the particular area of government I was working in was an all boys club, and I had a history of being an all boys club and had a long and storied checkered past, if you will, in that regard. And I wasn't necessarily in the closet, but presenting as a cis male as I did at that particular point and having a full beard, was able to sort of blend into a degree where the older, more senior staff perhaps didn't join the dots. And it was very clear to me that there was no overt issue with being out. And this is, I think, the most insidious sort of thing, is that it isn't always overt, but there would have been a significant ratcheting up of discomfort, and how I was treated, that interaction would have shifted drastically for being obviously outside the old boys club. And it wasn't until I left that space that I really even came to terms with significant parts of my identity, such as being trans and non-binary. I think what's really interesting to note in that space is that being in that space actually held me back from figuring things out for myself, let alone coming out publicly.
I'm happy to throw in a reflection here, which is actually that I changed jobs really recently. And I was actually fortunate enough to be going from, one very inclusive workplace to another really inclusive workplace. But what really smacked me in the face was that no matter how inclusive it is, and kind of, I could see from the cues around me in the workplace I was in that it was pretty safe. You've still got to do it. Like, you don't have to do it, but if you want to do it, you've still got to almost do the act. You still need to say something to someone, or, depending on how you want to come out in the workplace. But it smacked me in the face that it is quite hard. You still need to do it, and that it still does really take something. I'm sitting here as the CEO of a queer charity, right? I'm pretty public with my identity, but it still had, it was still something kind of performative almost I had to do in the workplace. And it still kind of caused something in the pit of my stomach. It all went really well, but I suppose it just really brought home for me that, hey, there are these barriers. It's why our organization exists, I suppose, is to just over time really chip away and make it so that, we all hope one day in Australia in workplaces, it kind of won't be a thing, or at least it won't be that thing that causes you any kind of in your stomach.
Yeah, I just going on from what Blake mentioned just then, as well as Ezra as well. I absolutely agree that it would be great to have to be in a time when we don't have to be coming out continuously at work. So my experience it runs a bit of parallel with Ezra's. So when I finished university and got my first job in engineering, I was a consulting engineer in the building services construction industry, which unfortunately can be quite homophobic and still is to an extent. Although I'm no longer in that industry, I've moved on to a slightly different industry. I was only out to a select group of people, and they were basically my friends from university. Some of them were a year or two ahead of me at university, so they finished and got into the workplace first. And we just so happened to have landed a job at the same company. So they knew I was gay, and they had no problems with it, seeing that we were friends at university anyway. However, within the first 6 months of working at at that particular company, there were actually quite a number of homophobic comments that were made to another gay engineer who was out. I was sort of semi-in, semi-out. Some of was gay, most didn't. And as soon as I witnessed those homophobic comments and the potential repercussions that could have happened from those comments in terms of what they had planned for that individual, for example, that will impact his career progression, I decided to backtrack and not come out to anyone beyond those who already knew I was gay. That was quite a number of years ago. And I've moved through different companies and industries over time. Some companies are very accepting that I'm gay and they've got no problems. The current company I work for, they all know I'm gay. There's no issues there. No one really makes an issue of it. I can talk, when I had a partner, I could talk about my partner quite openly and there was never any issues. Other organizations, I have to be a bit more careful, unfortunately. There are homophobic comments that sometimes are made in front of me without the individual knowing that I'm actually gay. So I find that really ironic at times. Funny in some ways, not very funny in some ways. But as Blake was saying, I do hope that one day we will be able to get to a point where we don't have to be coming out continuously at work. Unfortunately, that's not the case in a lot of industries at the moment, especially in the engineering industry, that it can be quite homophobic, especially if you are on construction sites as well. So we do have to deal with that continuously and can be very exhausting to keep saying my partner is a he in my case, or if I was a female, that my partner is a she. Or they or them. So I really look forward to a day when we don't have to do that any longer.
I think sort of follow on from those comments. I think one of the really interesting things about working in a big company like I do is the different teams that you go into, and you have to sort of keep repeating that coming out process, even though you haven't changed employer, and you still carry the same sort of social circle almost at work. You keep coming out, and every team has a different culture. And my firm does a lot to try and, we've got our Pride network, and we are very, we have a big emphasis on diversity and the importance of diversity in our company. But why you can have that sort of macro culture at the firm, and you sort of go in and you're like, okay, I know that this firm is, or this company is, all about diversity and celebrates diversity. You still have that sort of nervousness about what is my team's microculture like, and that can take some time to figure out. And then you hear a homophobic comment, and you're like, well, I'm not coming out in this team. But then you rotate, and there's a really lovely team, and there's people already out in that team, and you're really out in that. In that particular team, I'm using the word team so often, and it's really weird. And I've been in that position, and I am in that position where I'm really, like, there's quite a lot of people in my team who know that I'm bi and that I'm quite open and out about it. But there are teams that I've been in previously where it's not as well known, and that's a bit strange and something to sort of live with. But it sort of comes back to the comments that have been made already about there is the presumption of that you're straight, and that you're constantly having to sort of come out and tackle that presumption. And it can feel very much never-ending at the workplace.
I believe, as some of you have said, the coming out process at work is generally quite a gradual process, and a lot of time we're a bit more selective about who we come out to first. But we all know that in the office, people do talk, and sometimes word that gets passed through the grapevine. Did you ever have an experience where you were actually outed by someone else at work, perhaps a team member, a colleague, a subordinate? I mean, that can be quite daunting, can it? And like, how did you react to it? Maybe I should start with Tanner on this one.
Yep, sure. So yes, I was nodding my head because this is going back a number of years again. I was part of the mechanical team, and I developed quite a good relationship with the head of another department. And he knew I was gay. I think one of only 2 or 3 engineers in that company of 100 engineers who knew I was gay. So I was predominantly closeted. I had a chat to him and about my sexuality as I got to know him. And unfortunately, betrayed that trust, I suppose you could say, that he started telling other people that I was gay and pushed me to come out basically on his own terms and in his own time rather than my own time. So yes, unfortunately it has happened. It is a very uncomfortable situation when you are pushed and almost forced to come out before you're ready to, before you've had a chance to survey the landscape and know that, okay, it's safe, it's not going to jeopardize my career, my job, or my overall well-being. So unfortunately it has happened, but fortunately that was the only case where it has happened and it hasn't happened since. So that's just my experience there.
And what was your reaction about that?
So it was one of concern that he was forcing me to come out. And by that stage, I just accept the fact that there's nothing else I can do about it, because by the time I came around to that realization, a good chunk of the office, probably a quarter to half the people already knew that I was gay. And so there's nothing much I could do. So I was just accepting of it. But fortunately, the team environment was quite good, and they were very accepting of me, and I had no problems there. But initially, the initial reaction was, okay, crap, what's happening here? There was certainly stress, anxiety that went along with it. But as things progressed and I found out that it's a fairly safe environment, it was okay. But certainly did not appreciate being pushed.
That's, first of all, there's a few things that come to mind for me in that, in terms of, I might have recollected wrongly, but you're sort of saying your colleague who started talking about that was someone part of the community, if you will. And it's interesting to sort of stop and think about, sometimes the people we expect to be our strongest allies aren't. And it isn't that it's a motivation out of malice, and I'm sure that your colleague didn't necessarily intend that, but there's a sort of narrative, like particularly I think within community at times, that you have to be out and it's the most important thing in the world that you're out. And we encourage people to be out, but we encourage people to be out asterisks when it's safe, secure, good for you. Like, if you're not in a space where you can come out, then don't. And people need to respect that. It's interesting thinking about the grapevine. For me, that word really stuck in my mind. In one of my roles where I was out, it was back in hospitality. The grapevine took on a different form. It wasn't about whether or not I was queer or the identity that I held at that point in time. It was the lack of filter and barrier to then talk to me or talk to each other about what that entailed, to put it somewhat euphemistically, which was not helpful, particularly when I was there to do a job and I was in a management position at that point. And it was interesting to note that the grapevine, which doesn't always have that much respect for people's personal boundaries, just completely disappeared when it came to mine. That being said, on a positive note, when I came out as trans and non-binary in my current job, I actually relied upon the grapevine, because I talked to my colleagues and I said, look, I don't want to be answering 20 questions about what it means to be trans or what it means to be non-binary and which bathroom I go to for the next 6 months, because this is my task list for the day. If someone wants to ask you a question respectfully, you're more than welcome to deal with it, because I've talked to you about it and you know what it entails. And the grapevine actually really helped to kind of deflect pressure off me to be the champion and beacon of transness in my office, which is again a role that we all kind of find ourselves falling into in one shape or form during our time in the office, I think, when we're out.
I guess I'll go next. I haven't been, and I think that was because when I picked, when I was in a team that didn't have the greatest of sort of microcultures, and I came out to a few select people, like at the time we had the chat about how like the team wasn't that great, and please don't out me to anyone else in the team. So in that respect, I guess I was lucky in who I chose. At this point where I'm sort of out and proud, we've got into a stage where somebody might come out to somebody else and that person will say, why don't you talk to Ruby about it? She seems like a great contact. She seems like someone who could like have a chat to you and has good like networks and connections to like hook you up with resources or something. So I guess that's a role that I'm happy to take on, because like I've got, I guess, the privilege of being cis and not having to deal with like transphobia, to take that on. But it is one of those roles that you sort of get shoved into by the cis straight people in your team who don't really know how to deal with somebody coming out to them. And you just sort of, suck it up and take it on, I guess, to, help out the baby queers.
Ruby, I love this word of beacon, and Ezra, you alluded it to being the beacon of transness in the office. Yeah, I've had it happen to me once, and I think it related to this idea because actually this person thought that I was the beacon and was happy to be the beacon in all circumstances. And kind of the situation that arose was with a client. I think, Dr. Tana, you were alluding to like the difficulty of client kind of situations before, I think. But yeah, it had basically, they said it to a client and suddenly I felt, not okay about it instantaneously, actually a little bit betrayed. And anyway, I suppose the flip side is we were able to have kind of an educational discussion, I suppose, around this, kind of educate them. Look, not that the onus is on any of us to do the education, but I suppose silver lining was it became an educational discussion. And I suppose, yeah, trying to say it's not as clear cut as either you're the beacon and you're out to everyone or you're in the closet. Sometimes, there are different lines you draw depending on quite simply how comfortable you feel in that individual, individual situation. And in that circumstance, for whatever reason, because the client was, new and just the feeling you got as ambiguous as that is, it wasn't okay for me in that situation.
Yes, I think coming out is definitely one's own choice. I mean, you should come out when you feel like it's comfortable for yourself. And something really interesting that Ruby has said is that when she came out, her colleague has said, has started using her as a person to let people talk to when they're not sure about whether to come out or not at work. I think that's something that's really interesting. And for everyone else, did you happen to notice any change after you came out in your workplace? Were people treating you differently? Were you feeling differently? I believe we can start with Blake on this one.
The biggest thing for me since I've started moving into workplaces where I'm more out has definitely been around relationships. Basically, I had one workplace at the very start of my career where I wasn't out. I never felt like I was really able to deeply get to know my colleagues. And I thought that was what a normal workplace was like. I was like, oh, we always hide a part of ourselves. And, we just come in, we do the kind of machinery of our work from 9 to 5, and then we leave. And that's just, work doesn't feel connected. And that's just what a workplace feels like. And since, entering the professional world in earnest and being able to come out, I've seen that when I am able to bring my whole self to work, I'm able to connect with people on a much deeper level. And I've learned that workplaces can be places where you form not only friendships, but like best friendships, and where you connect really deeply. You get the work done, but you also, they're human places and you're connecting with these other people. So definitely the biggest thing for me has been around relationships and everything that means for a workplace, being myself and being able to connect with other people.
Absolutely. 100% echo that. It definitely helped make the relationships with, the individuals that I would speak to more, I guess, deeply and meaningfully about my sexuality or whatever. It made those relationships a lot more authentic. You feel like you're not hiding something from them. The flip side then is when I started sort of coming out to people at work, I wasn't really out to people in my community, in my family, or in my family friends or other people who were Sri Lankan Tamil who I knew. And it made me realize how uncomfortable it can be to sort of have those sort of two identities where you're queer and you're also a person of color, and they're really difficult identities to sort of hold together sometimes. So building these like authentic relationships at work or with some other groups of friends from university, for example, I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to not sort of hide something or to, deflect from your sexuality. So that was a strange and interesting process. I think once upon a time, people wouldn't have expected that coming out at work would have that sort of impact because you'd sort of come out to your social network. But it is great that, in this year, in this day and age, we have sort of workplaces that do try to make their workplaces more inviting. definitely made it a lot more authentic.
That also really, really resonates with me. The workplace was the first place that I came out as trans and non-binary. And as Ruby sort of mentioned in her personal experience and lived experience, I had a sort of similar and analogous story, sort of discounting for a second the fact that I am not myself QTPOC and don't have that lived experience. I was out in the workplace and I changed my name because my workplace allows me to change my name before I've legally updated my paperwork. And I'm also Jewish, but the name I was born with wasn't a Jewish name, and there's a whole story there. And I was out in my synagogue in my Jewish community, which was my main social circle here in Melbourne at that time, with the identity, but without the name, because there was a serious amount of discomfort whether or not I could take that name in that space, in that way. And then I wasn't out at all in my family. I was out to my mum who knew, but my parents are in their 70s and we were deeply concerned that my father wouldn't react well. So there was this whole narrative of sort of not just having a foot in both camps, but somehow having 2 feet in 3 camps, which was very weird. But the workplace in all of that was an amazing experience because I was able to, walk into the office and hear the name I wanted. And, there was a few issues, like some of the IT systems still have my dead name on there, which is really not helpful. And I get a message or two every couple of weeks being like, who is so-and-so? And I'm like, oh, we don't talk about them, but that used to be me. But for me, coming out in the workplace like that, I came out in Ida Hobbit of 2019. The most terrified I've ever been to stand up in a meeting and speak my mind ever, which is not a usual experience for me. I'm usually quite brazen and brash. And I spoke my piece. I introduced myself with my new name, said this is what I am. I'm welcome to, open to questions, but please also be understanding and respectful. And everybody was. And then there was a whole conversation around bathrooms because my workplace has male bathrooms, female bathrooms, and an accessible bathroom. And there was a conversation about not which bathroom can I use, but which bathroom do I feel comfortable using. And I had a succession of women coming past my desk saying, because I'd expressed that I didn't want to use the women's bathroom being trans, but also being non-binary because I didn't feel like I presented in a way that would make people feel safe. And that's a very real anxiety for a lot of trans people and non-binary people. And I had a procession of women coming past my desk saying, you can come into the bathroom, we're not scared. We know you, but also that's not the point. This is your identity. Obviously, moving to remote work in 2020 has really solved that problem for all of us, but that experience was really affirming. And in many ways, the workplace became a safe haven in that regard. And again, when I got diagnosed with ADHD earlier this year, I saw a monumental shift. I went from being an employee who, I wouldn't say I didn't perform, I think I did perform, but I struggled to perform and I struggled to get work done. And I struggled against the confines of my role, but also the confines of who I was in that role. And I wasn't happy. I was just kind of a bit miserable most of the time. And it wasn't that my workplace was unaccepting. Half of the floor was queer, but because I wasn't being myself, there was that self-editing, which is a lot of emotional labor. And coming out changed all of that. And I see it in, again, being brazen and brash in meetings. I'm one of the most outspoken people in my team. And that's tied directly back to when I came out. That flipped a switch for me. Not necessarily immediately. It was a gradual sort of flip, if that can be a thing. But it really changed how I engage with my workplace and made me a better employee and improved my prospects for my career, to be quite honest. I wouldn't have the success I have now without having done that.
I'll be very brief here because my experience is very similar to all the other panelists. So certainly as I've changed companies and progressed in my career, I've become more and more out, which progressively, sometimes I do go back in the closet a bit, depending on how I feel, but the overall progression is generally becoming more and more out to the point where my current company, I am out to everyone who needs to know. So it certainly has made it easier for me to connect with other individuals at work that they know I'm gay and they've got no issue with that. So there are sporting activities that occur after work. I'd invite them along as well, and so on and so forth. So I haven't really had that that freedom or sense of freedom when I first joined the workforce out of university when I was quite closeted. I'm also in a fairly client-facing role as well, and to have that backing from your company and the staff actually does make a difference as well. That if you do have to speak to clients, about your personal life, about your partner. There's no general issues. You know the company's behind you, and that does make a huge difference as well. So certainly, my personal experience is it's been a struggle to come out, but having individuals and staff, employees behind you, it does make a huge difference, not just internally within the company, but also when you're dealing with clients as well.
I believe something that resonates from what you've said is that even though it can be quite a difficult experience to come out, there are definitely positive impact to coming out in your workplace. And I believe for me, coming out at work has actually tapped me into a stream of supportive allies as well as role models that I can get in contact to in my workplace. And here at Australia, we recognize the importance of having queer representation in our role models and the impact that that might have on our individual's growth journey. And that's why we have 30 Under 30 awards to recognize quality role models in our community. Going forward, did you have any LGBTQIA+ role models or great allies in your workplace? And what impact did this make on you?
I'll start off and say my firm has a network of, the Pride Network, and joining it and sort of getting involved and putting my hand up for things has meant that I've interacted a lot more with other really people who are out and proud at work, and they're all really great and really fantastic, and that's been lovely. It's been amazing. In my team, in my sort of bigger team, there's a gay man who's been, out and proud for decades and has, seen a lot of change at the firm. And I think he's quite a beacon again in the Melbourne office. I've described him before, and I think it's very accurate. He's sort of the mother duck, and we've got these like baby ducklings of, young queer lawyers trailing after him because we all love him and we all think he's amazing. And it's really good to see people who are out and proud and who are senior at the firm. The CEO of my firm, her son is gay, and she's very open about that and very proud of him and all that he's achieved, and his husband. And then also, partners at the firm who are gay and very out and proud. And it gives you a sense of confidence that your career progression isn't going to be hampered by the fact that you're queer. And it gives you a sense of confidence that the firm will back you in what you do. So that's really, really great. It's like, I think the best word is comforting, because you sort of grow up and you always worry that you're going to lose your job if somebody finds out that you're gay or you're bi or you're trans, or you're going to, have your career sort of curtailed and shoved in a dead end street because of your identity. So to see people who've, progressed their careers and gone to great, heights and achievements, is really good for that sort of, frightened kid, inside you that's worried that something's going to happen because of sexuality or because of your gender.
I think that's something I can really resonate with. I mean, my first interaction with OFA was through the mentorship program, where I was assigned an LGBTIQ mentor. And before that, being a immigrant and someone from a working class, I didn't know anyone who has achieved career success, who are also gay. So that pretty much opened me up to a whole range of network and connections, where I realized that gay people can actually succeed in their career and can do very well in different professions. What are your thoughts on this, Dr. Tanner?
Yeah, so Joe and I are both engineers, and I will speak from an engineering perspective. So when I first joined the workplace, there were no other gay engineers who I would look up to as a role model, because there's basically almost non-existent. So I had a few peer gay engineers, but none of us actually knew anyone who we'd classify as role model, who are at least 5-10 years ahead of us in terms of whether it's career or our physical age. So it was quite a difficult time that we were all floundering around and not sure whether we can actually make any headway in this rather homophobic environment. And even up till this point in time, when I scat around and do a quick survey of the engineering field, there are again not very many gay senior engineers who have done really well to career and shone a path. So the only person that comes to mind that's as close as I could call a role model is the former, and forgive me, I've forgotten his name, but he's the former head of BP. He's now retired. He was I believe, a chemical engineer. He's done extremely well, obviously, to get up to the CEO level of BP. But all through his career, he was actually not out. He only came out towards the end of his career, and I believe it was even right before he retired. And this is going back through his autobiography that he wrote, which I've read. One of his regrets, if I remember correctly, is that he did not come out earlier and become a beacon for the other gay engineers. I'm sorry, when I use the term gay, I do also mean that inclusively in terms of rainbow. So I believe that was one of his regrets, and I'm hoping that that history will not repeat itself, that other gay senior engineers will come out and become a role model for other engineers.
I felt very, like, I mean, everything that's been said tonight really resonates with me, but what you were just saying there, Tanner, about role models and not seeing them really resonated for me. Back in my previous of my 9 lives, when I identified as a gay man, I mean, being of generation where I was able to see that, but now being out as trans and non-binary, and particularly as someone who's trans feminine, I mean, it's hard enough to see women in leadership positions and as role models in the workforce. It's harder again when those women or those sort of feminine identifying people or gender diverse people are, well, gender diverse. It's really tough. I don't see anyone in a leadership position. I see people in advocacy positions, and I see people in community leadership positions, and I look up to a lot of those people. But sort of the people I draw strength from in the office are allies to my lived experience, even if they themselves are members of the community. I was lucky to be on secondment recently. I did actually have a manager who was gender diverse themselves, and it was really insightful. Just they were a bit further ahead in their career than me, and it was great to have those conversations about, okay, well, I've been in this position, I've been in this level for 3 years. How do I move up? In terms of gender, in terms of neurodiversity, and they were able to sort of talk to me, relate on some level or another to both of those things. But the experience that really sticks with me and that kind of jumped to mind when I looked at this question was just after I'd come out and changed my name in the workplace, working in the public sector, Victorian government public sector, sorry, words are hard. The department has a champion for LGBTQIA plus rights, one of the deputy secretaries, so one of sort of the organizational leads. And she had come up to say goodbye to someone at their leaving party back when we were still in the office and still doing that. And she ran into me at the cake stand, as one does. And she knew me because I was also chair of the Pride Network at that point, at that organization. And she spent 20 minutes asking me how I was going and if I had the support I needed, and what were the issues that I was facing. Bathrooms okay? Is access okay? Is changing your name okay? What systems are we having issues with? Because IT is a bit slow on things sometimes. Are people getting your pronouns right? And it was 20 minutes of like, how are you? How are you? Are you out further than this? Are things going okay for you? Are things okay in your personal life? Have you got support? And I just sat there and went, you're paid, easily $200,000 more a year than me. I know you've got 16, critical priorities on your desk when you get back downstairs and you won't leave in the office till 11 p.m. Most of the time they kind of duck upstairs, grab a slice of cake, shake a hand and to leave. And I'm like, you're spending 20 minutes talking to me. I'm a junior. How are you here? Why are you here? Like, it doesn't make sense. But it stuck with me because that's what allyship is. It's genuine connection. It's human connection. It's putting the person first. She didn't care that I was a junior or that she was a deputy secretary. She cared that I was supported and I had what I needed. And she recognized that she had the ability to make sure that I did. And that's what allyship is. It's putting the person who needs the support first, front-footing that person's needs and talking about their position, and kind of leaving whatever inconvenience, however slight it might be, just to one side for 5 seconds. Like, she knew those briefs were still there, but they'd still be there when she got downstairs. What was important right then and that was that an employee, that a co-worker, that a person she had a relationship with was supported. And that was a really powerful story of allyship for me.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, Ezra, allyship, especially from leaders, like leadership. Like some workplaces, you know, they scratch their heads and they think, what can we do? And sometimes it's an approach of like a magic fix, like we'll do a training or we'll write one policy. In reality, it's probably a whole lot of different things together at the same time. But one critical kind of ingredient that's been shown by the studies, and as Azra is talking to, is leadership from the top. People who we can look up and see they look like us and who are willing to walk the walk. And in particular, allies who may not identify, but will speak openly about how they support it. And again, as Ezra was alluding to, come down to the individual level and have those human conversations that drive so much of it.
It's interesting that Blake has mentioned about leadership. Obviously, it plays a very important role in leading the culture in your organization. In certain industries, though, we still see very few senior management positions or C-suite positions who are openly identified as LGBTIQA+. Do you think this is slowly changing, or do we still have a long way to go? What are your thoughts, Ruby?
I think it will change slowly and over time. I think this is one of those questions that comes back to sort of, is affirmative action worth it? Should we use affirmative action to sort of promote leaders? I think one of the benefits, at least in terms of in terms of the queer community, is that we all look like just regular members of the community. People might not notice that you are, or not realize that you are queer until you open up and talk about it. And I think that's a pathway for change, maybe. But look, I think it'll change. I think it'll change slowly. I don't know how many companies are going to sort of make a distinction between their queer and their non-queer employees in terms of considering for leadership. At least the ones that prize diversity. And that's a conversation that Australia and the rest of the world is having, and we're slowly moving towards the right side of history.
I might jump in actually. Just a thought that came into my mind as you were talking there, Ruby. It's an interesting conundrum because I particularly my first response when you said that joke was, oh god, glacially, and then I had to stop myself and kind of ask why, because obviously I'm coming from my particular industry, which is currently the public sector, and the reality, and this isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, is that everything is strongly merit-based, and it should always be merit-based. You should be hiring the right person for a job, but the challenge is that merit can often re-entrench existing prejudices or existing disparities of power and access to opportunities, because obviously it's based on qualifications and access to education and all these kind of things. I think, yeah, there's a few things that jump out at me. First of all, it's not just about whether or not the people are in those positions, but whether or not they're visible, as Ruby says. That's a really key thing. And the other thing that I think is really important in terms of recruitment, in terms of promotion, is recognizing that queer people and non-queer people, just as neurotypical and neurodiverse people, or typically abled and differently abled people, we don't have the same experiences, we don't have the same things to bring to bear on a role. Sort of stepping outside the queer bubble, like my ADHD, I find a really powerful lens to bring on the work that I do, because I interact with information in a slightly different way. My gender is also really important because I do written communications, and I'll have something come across my desk and it'll be dear sir / madam, and I'll be like, hang on a minute, we're not doing this. And it's really powerful to consider, what does this person bring by virtue of their lived experience? It's not just where they went to university or to school, which I know is a really important question here in Melbourne. It's what do their experiences tell them and educate them about the world, and how does that inform how they make decisions and how they do their work in a good way? Because I think a lot of the time it is a good way.
Lovely. I've just got a question coming from the audience. In your experience, what was the most impactful thing that an organization can do in making you feel comfortable to come to work? I believe this one is more around how one organization can do to make a workplace more diverse and more friendly.
I'll go ahead with that question. So there's a couple of things. Firstly, is the culture at work. I fortunately work in a company which is very culturally diverse, very linguistically diverse. I unfortunately am the only gay engineer there, well, that I know of. There could be another one who is not out yet, I'm not sure. But having that genuine culture where they are inclusive, not just in writing, but actually in actual practice, makes a huge difference. I have also noticed, I'm just going to answer a bit of the previous question as well as this one. I've noticed that a lot of large engineering firms now do have their own ally network or LGBTQIA network. I believe that actually is going to make a huge difference as well. So I think for me, it's both the culture as well as potentially a formal network. If you're a large enough company, small companies, I mean, for me to form a formal network, it'll be a formal network of one, so a bit pointless. So that's why I say in large companies or even medium-sized companies. So those would be two things I'd say would make it most comfortable when you come out at work.
Yeah, I might jump in here. Completely agree. And the studies agree, Dr. Tana, that culture is so incredibly important in creating that safe atmosphere. And to answer the listener's question, I think one really specific aspect of workplaces that employers need to think about, if there's any managers or employers on the line, that goes to culture, is calling out and the ability for people to call out, and education around calling out. One, queerphobic, homophobic comment in a workplace that goes uncalled out can shatter, goes above any policy you have. It shatters that training you did. It shatters that CEO statement. If, in the kitchen or, in the, on the work floor, that one comment goes and people hear it, especially they identify, that will just undo all that good. And so how do you create an atmosphere where people can call out? Well, first of all, I think they need to know how to do it. And sometimes allies can actually be really well-meaning, but just don't know what or how or when. And so there's specific trainings around calling out, but, even from the top, showing, again, it comes down to inclusive leadership and I suppose the importance of strong leaders, but putting your money where your mouth is and being willing to call it out. And if I can add one more thing, again, I think I mentioned earlier, the onus is never on us queer people to kind of do this, but if you do feel comfortable and you can do it, it shouldn't be our responsibility, but it will add a lot. And certainly if there's a moment where something goes and nothing is said, then those situations can cause a lot of damage. And another option is to follow it up after, if you don't want to do it in the moment. I know I've been caught in situations where something's gone and then you don't get in and conversation moves on. And I've kind of collected my thoughts afterwards and sent an email or followed up with the person. But yeah, I suppose culture can sometimes be so amorphous. So I think the importance of calling out and the acts and the performances around that sometimes quite important.
One thing I would sort of add into that, and everything that's been said so far is like completely 100% on the money. And this is for when you're thinking about whether or not you're going into a workplace. And I know a lot of people are looking for work at the moment, and obviously we're in a challenging time and you don't always get the luxury of asking all the questions you want and being as discerning as you would like during these situations. But something that's really important to me is trying to figure out before I get a foot in the door whether or not I'm going to want to work there. And part of being, wanting to work there is whether or not I want to be out. An experience recently where I was looking at a job application and I phoned the number on the job ad, as I do anytime I'm applying for a job, to ask them questions about the role. And various reasons, they don't have any answers about the role itself. But I asked what their HR policies were around transitioning leave, around, accommodations for neurodiversity, these things that really matter to me, that I've built up a safety net in my current job and that kind of gives me security, and I don't necessarily want to leave that behind. And the response I got was, what's transitioning? And when I had to explain it, which is, I can tell you, the most awkward thing I've ever had to do on a professional call, oh, well, I wouldn't know. I haven't had to go through that. And I immediately, I turned to my partner and I said, I'm applying for that job. I don't want to work there. Like, I'd heard good things about this workplace from other sectors, but if that was the first instinct I got or the first instinct I got of what that was like and what mattered there, not least because they couldn't answer questions for me about what the role was actually going to be. I didn't want to put my foot in the door because that told me that I was going to run into problems down the line. So I think sort of the addendum to that is have policies, have detailed policies, have specific policies. So have a policy for transition leave, have a policy for wardrobes, uniform, things like that. Have a policy for bathrooms. I know I'm quoting a lot of transgender-based ones, but have policies that get down to the detail of what people need. And if you don't know what people need, ask them. And then make sure your managers and people who are supposed to need to know these things and recruiters know them. Because a recruitment process is just as much about selling yourself as finding someone to purchase, for lack of a better word. So if you're hiring someone, make sure you know what they're going to be looking for, or you have the information to hand.
Thank you very much. I think that's a really great point right there. I believe that concludes our Q&A time. If you want to find out more about what Our For Australia does or our organization, please check out our website at ourforaustralia.org. A huge thank you to all the panelists that we have here tonight. So that's Tanner, Ezra, Ruby, and Blake. Furthermore, I would like to thank my amazing team who has put the event together tonight. A quick reminder that the nominations for our 30 Under 30 award are still open. This is our chance to recognize young LGBTIQA+ people who are making tangible contributions in bettering the life of LGBTIQA+ people in Australia, people who are demonstrating success in their field and living with authenticity, courage, and resilience, demonstrating the qualities of a role model. We want to recognize these unsung heroes of the LGBTIQ+A+ community. So please highlight any work that they're doing that might have gone unnoticed. The nomination will remain open until next Tuesday. We are pleased to have you to join in this conversation, and we hope that this has given you food for thought. Please take a moment to complete the feedback survey at the end of our event, and thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.